The courtroom went silent the moment the attorney's son smirked and said the words no one dares to say out loud. Money buys justice. Gasps rippled through the gallery as Judge Judy froze, her piercing stare locking onto him. This wasn't just arrogance, it was a challenge. He clearly believed his family name and wealth made him untouchable, but instead of shutting him down, Judge Judy let the silence stretch. She let him talk. With every word, his confidence turned into a confession. Then she leaned forward and asked one question that flipped the entire case on its head, and what happened next left the courtroom completely frozen. But before we dive in, tell me, where are you watching from? And don't forget to hit that subscribe button. The smirk still lingered at the corner of his mouth, even as the courtroom murmurs died into an uneasy hush. Judge Judy didn't speak. She didn't blink. She simply watched him, the attorney's son who thought the world bent at the weight of his last name. The tension clung to the air like static as the young man leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, posture dripping confidence no 20-something should reasonably have. His expensive watch glimmered beneath the courtroom lights, a quiet reminder of where he believed his value came from. He glanced over at the gallery, as if expecting applause for his earlier proclamation. Money buys justice. But Judge Judy only lifted her chin slightly. Not a reaction, not a twitch, just presence, and that alone was enough to rattle the unprepared. Across the aisle, the plaintiff, a young single mother named Elena, sat stiffly. Her hands knotted together. The betrayal, the exhaustion, all of it lived behind her eyes. She didn't look at the son. She looked at Judy, as if silently begging her not to let him overpower the truth again. The father sat behind his son, polished suit, silver tie clip, posture of a man who had lived his whole life unchallenged. He didn't smirk like his son did. He didn't need to. The quiet confidence in his eyes said everything. This is beneath us. She's beneath us. Judge Judy shifted her gaze to Elena, then back to the son. Let's begin, she said simply. He jumped in before she could ask a question, a rehearsed performance practiced in front of mirrors and echoed by a lifetime of privilege. This is a misunderstanding, he said, feigning polite charm. Elena misinterpreted our arrangement. There was never any dishonesty on my part. Judy's eyebrow lifted just slightly. Then explain the arrangement, succinctly. He launched into a smooth explanation, too smooth. His language was corporate, rehearsed, sharp at the edges. As he spoke, Judy watched not his words, but his face, the tiny muscles of confidence flexing every time he believed he'd impressed her. He described payment schedules, agreements, gestures he insisted were generous, favor he claimed she abused. But something in his delivery was off, too polished, too clean, like a man wiping fingerprints off a knife. Elena's shoulders tightened. She knew this story, his version, and she knew how dangerously convincing he could be when left unchallenged. Judy let him talk, let him over-explain, let him weave a rope he didn't realize he was wrapping around himself. And when he finally paused to breathe, she leaned forward, elbows resting lightly on the bench, eyes narrowing as if she were examining something under high magnification. Repeat, she said, the part about the payment timing. Slowly. His smirk faltered, only a fraction, but enough. Because he knew, and the audience knew, that she had heard something he shouldn't have said. Judy folded her hands. I want the exact words you used, she told him, voice low and razor sharp. What you just said didn't match your paperwork. The microphone caught the tiny hitch in his breath. The smirk was gone now, replaced by a flicker of calculation. Judge Judy's eyes didn't move, but the pressure in the room shifted like someone had tightened a wire. He cleared his throat and sat up straighter, as if posture alone could make his story more truthful. The payment timing? He echoed, pretending confusion. I already explained that. Judy didn't blink. Explain it again, slowly. The audience leaned in. Even the cameras seemed to hum with anticipation. Elena watched him with a kind of exhausted certainty. She had lived this puzzle before, and she knew exactly where the pieces didn't fit. The son inhaled, rehearsing the script in his head. The payment was due at the end of the month. She was aware of that. End of which month? Judy asked. His jaw tightened. The end of that month, when the service was completed. Judy finally moved, just a small tilt of her head, a predator's acknowledgement of prey revealing a wound. That's not what you said the first time, and not what's written in your statement. A murmur rippled through the gallery. The father behind him shifted forward, expression flattening, the first sign that this might not be as smooth as they'd expected. Judy held up the thin packet of paperwork, the pages fanned like a deck of cards. Your document says the payment was due before the service was completed. Your testimony now says after. Which one is it? The son swallowed hard. It was flexible. Flexible, Judy repeated, letting the word fall like a dead weight. She set the papers down with a soft thud that somehow echoed louder than a gavel. Flexible is not a legal term. Try again. His leg bounced beneath the table, a nervous tic he tried to hide. He glanced back at his father, who subtly motioned for him to keep talking, no doubt the same silent instruction he'd given 100 times in private negotiations. He exhaled sharply. She misunderstood. I told her the due date verbally. It wasn't formalized. Elena shook her head, gripping the edge of her table. That's not true. Judy held up a palm. She wasn't ready for her yet. Not until the boy was done tying knots around himself. You said earlier the agreement was written and clear, Judy reminded him. Now you're saying it was verbal and flexible. That is a substantial shift. The son's lips parted, searching for footing that no longer existed. I may have phrased it differently earlier, but the meaning, Judy cut in, is that your story is changing. He stiffened, eyes darting between Judy and the paperwork that betrayed him. The room grew still again, the kind of stillness that warned of an oncoming storm. Judy finally turned away from him and toward Elena. Tell me, she said, voice steady and sharp, what you saw and when you saw it. Elena's breath trembled as she rose, one hand flattening the wrinkled papers she'd held onto like life preservers. The room softened, not out of pity, but out of recognition. This was the moment she had waited for and feared. She stepped toward the podium as though approaching a cliff's edge. Every eye in the courtroom watched, but her gaze stayed anchored on Judge Judy. The only person who had ever made her feel the truth mattered more than power. Elena, Judy said gently, take your time. Elena nodded. When she spoke, her voice was steady, but you could hear the fractures beneath it, the kind you only get from being dismissed one too many times. He told me, she began, nodding toward the defendant, that he was helping me, that he understood I was struggling. The son rolled his eyes, but something about his expression was tighter now, forced. I believed him, Elena continued. He said he could get me a discounted rate, that he'd handle everything. All I had to do was trust him. Her fingers tightened around the papers. And I wanted to, because I was alone and scared. And he made it seem so easy. Flashback-like images played in the viewer's mind. A small apartment with past due notices, Elena pacing in half-lit rooms, the son's rehearsed charm pressing its way into her vulnerabilities like a knife disguised as a helping hand. He told me the payment was due only after everything was finished, Elena said. But then, out of nowhere, he demanded it earlier. And when I told him I didn't have it yet, her voice cracked, not from helplessness, but from memory. He told me people like me should be grateful for people like him, that his family could make or break opportunities for single mothers. A hush fell over the courtroom. The father's expression hardened, not in guilt, but irritation. The son leaned forward sharply, whispering something to him, jaw clenched. Judy's hand lifted. Let her finish. Elena swallowed. I tried to show him the original agreement, the one he gave me. But when he looked at it, he said I must have misplaced the updated version. She held up the document now, edges worn, the ink slightly smudged. This is the only one I ever got, and the payment date is right here. Clear as day. Judy took the paper, her eyes narrowing not at Elena, but at the contradictions now swelling around the defendant like smoke. You're certain, Judy asked quietly, that he never gave you a revised document? Elena didn't hesitate. Absolutely. If he had, I would have kept it. I keep everything. The courtroom remained silent. The son avoided her eyes. The father pursed his lips, calculating. Then Judy flipped the paper over and paused, noticing a small detail, something delicate and dangerously out of place. A notation, a mark, something that shouldn't be there. Judy slowly lifted her gaze to the defendant. "Interesting," she murmured, "because this directly contradicts your earlier statement." Judge Judy held the document up to the light, the thin paper glowing like a warning flare. The defendant shifted in his seat, suddenly too aware of how still the room had become. Something on that page had just changed the temperature of the courtroom. Judy lowered the document slowly. The way a surgeon sets aside an X-ray that confirms an injury no one wanted to acknowledge. "This," she said, tapping the corner with her index finger, "is your problem." The son sat forward, mask of confidence slipping. "What problem? It's the same paper I gave her." "No," Judy replied, voice steady as steel. "It's the paper she received. The question is whether it's the same one you created." She turned the page toward him. "Would you like to explain this initial right here? The one that appears altered?" The camera pulled tight on his face. Panic flickered, brief but unmistakable. "That's my initial," he insisted. "It's always looked like that." Judy's eyebrow lifted with surgical precision. "No, it hasn't. I looked at your signature on your statement, on your ID, on your father's letter to the court. Your initial is fluid. This one," she tapped it again, "stops and restarts. That indicates hesitation, and hesitation usually means modification." A ripple of gasps spread through the gallery. The father rose from his seat. "Your Honor, if I may—" "You may not," Judy snapped, slicing the air with a glance so sharp it could have cut silk. "Sit down. Your son is the one who's testifying." The father sat, jaw flexing. Judy turned back to the young man. "When did you make this change? Before or after you gave Elena the original document?" His mouth opened, closed, worked silently, grasping for the script that had guided him his entire life. But privilege was a poor substitute for truth, and right now, truth was demanding payment. Elena watched him, not triumphantly, but with a quiet sorrow, the kind that comes from finally seeing a person for who they truly are. The son's voice cracked as he tried to regain control. I didn't change anything. Maybe the copy machine smudged it." Judy leaned back, utterly unconvinced. "Copy machines don't hesitate. People do." The audience murmured, the energy shifting toward something sharper, anticipation mixed with disbelief. "And another thing," Judy continued, flipping to the next page. "Your timeline is inconsistent. Your statements contradict each other, and your attitude suggests you believed none of this would be examined." He stared at her, lips trembling at the corners, the first real crack in his veneer. Judy closed the file, hands folding atop it like a judge sealing a verdict. "Before I go any further," she said, "I want to hear from someone else." The son froze. Elena looked confused. The father's head snapped up, sensing danger. Judy nodded to the bailiff. "Bring in the witness waiting in the hallway." A collective breath caught in the gallery. A witness? To what? As the door opened and footsteps approached, Judy looked directly at the defendant and said, "This is where your story stops matching reality." The door creaked open, and every head in the courtroom turned. A figure stepped inside, not timid, not unsure, but steady in a way that made the defendant's smirk evaporate entirely. For the first time, he looked genuinely afraid. The witness walked down the aisle with the kind of deliberate calm that comes from carrying a truth too heavy for too long. Mid-30s, dressed clean but modest, posture straight. His eyes never left the young man at the defendant's table. The son shifted in his seat, gripping the edge of the table. I don't know who this is," he stammered, voice cracking. "Oh, you know," the witness replied, voice low but clear enough to echo. "You absolutely know." A murmur rippled through the audience. Judge Judy folded her hands. "State your name for the record." "Marcus Hale." "And your connection to the defendant?" Marcus inhaled. "He exploited me financially. Same method, same promises, same lies." The father's hand shot up. "Your Honor, this is irrelevant to the current dispute." Judy silenced him with a single raised finger. "This court is examining credibility. Patterns are absolutely relevant." Then to Marcus. "Continue." Marcus nodded. I met him 2 years ago. He said he wanted to help me negotiate a settlement I was dealing with. Told me he had connections, that his father could speed things up. Said I could trust him. The defendant sank lower in his seat, eyes darting desperately between Marcus, Judy, and his father. Marcus's jaw tightened. He told me I only had to pay him after everything was resolved. Then, halfway through, he demanded payment early. When I couldn't give it to him, he threatened me, said he could make sure things didn't go my way if I didn't cooperate. A sharp gasp cut through the courtroom. Elena covered her mouth. The words were painfully familiar. Judy nodded slowly, observing the defendant's reaction. So you're saying his behavior followed a pattern? Marcus turned, staring directly into the young man's eyes. He picks people who don't have power, people who believe he's helping, then he twists it. The defendant sputtered. That's not true. He's lying. I barely know this guy. Marcus didn't blink. You knew me well enough to take my money. Judy leaned forward slightly. Did you file a complaint? Marcus hesitated, shame flickering across his features. No, I didn't think anyone would believe me. He made it clear who his family was. The father's face hardened, no longer masked with polished arrogance, but edged with fear of exposure. Judy tapped the bench, crisp and decisive. That hesitation, that fear, that is how patterns thrive. She looked at the defendant. Two people, same experience, same manipulation, same timeline inconsistencies. That's not coincidence, that's design. The son's breathing quickened, sweat glistened along his hairline. Explain, Judy said, voice cold and exact, why this testimony matches Elena's almost word for word. His mouth opened, but no explanation came. Judy folded her hands again, gaze locked on him. You have 30 seconds, she said, voice razor sharp. Convince me this isn't a pattern you created. The defendant opened his mouth, but the words tangled before they ever escaped. For the first time, silence didn't serve him. It exposed him. Judge Judy watched the unraveling with the precision of someone who had seen arrogance collapse 100 times before. The young man's throat bobbed as he tried to force out a response. His confidence, the smugness he'd worn like designer cologne, had evaporated under the heat of Marcus's testimony. All that remained was sweat, fear, and the growing awareness that his father couldn't shield him from this. He finally stammered, This is ridiculous. These people are just trying to make me look bad. Make you look bad? Judy echoed. No, son, you're doing that all by yourself. A ripple of laughter slipped through the gallery before Judy cut it off with a glance sharp enough to slice stone. The father leaned forward, voice low but slicing through the tension. Stop talking, he hissed to his son. Let me handle this. But Judy heard it. She always heard everything. She held up a hand. No, he started this. He'll finish it. The defendant's face twisted. Frustration, fear, resentment, all competing for dominance. I didn't manipulate anyone, he insisted, voice pitching upward. I gave them opportunities. If they didn't follow through, that's not my fault. Marcus scoffed under his breath. Elena looked down, emotionally exhausted by the familiar cruelty of that logic. Judy leaned forward, resting her elbows on the bench. So you're telling me, she said slowly, that both of these individuals, with completely separate lives, experiences, and financial struggles, just happened to misunderstand you in the exact same way? His jaw clenched. They twisted my words. Judy tilted her head. Or did you twist their vulnerability? The defendant's nostrils flared. No, you're taking their side because they're emotional, and I'm not. A collective gasp swept through the audience. The father closed his eyes, mortified. Judy didn't move, but the courtroom did. The energy shifted, sharp, electric, merciless. She spoke softly, which somehow made it more devastating. Emotional does not mean dishonest. Arrogant does not mean credible. He deflated, shoulders slumping, the posture of a man who'd built his entire persona on the belief that consequences were things that happened to other people. Judy flipped through the paperwork again, her expression tightening. You said earlier that you never asked for early payment. Marcus says you did. Elena says you did. And your documents. She let the silence fill the room. Your documents don't match your statements. His fingers fidgeted at his collar, pulling at fabric that suddenly felt too tight. Which brings me, Judy continued, to the matter of the financial transfers. The son's head jerked up. What transfers? Oh, so you do know which ones I'm referring to. Judy's tone was calm, dangerously calm. His father straightened, eyes narrowing. What transfers are you talking about, Your Honor? Judy didn't answer him. Instead, she pulled a sealed envelope from beneath the bench, crisp, official, ominously heavy. The defendant's entire face drained of color. Judy tapped the envelope once. I haven't mentioned this yet, she said, but I requested a subpoena before today's hearing. And what I received is very interesting. The sealed envelope made a soft thud as Judge Judy set it on the bench. The defendant stared at it like it contained a ticking bomb. His father leaned forward, the first real fear flickering beneath his polished composure. Judy tapped the envelope again, once, twice, the sound crisp, deliberate, surgical. When I notice inconsistencies, she said calmly, I investigate. She broke the seal with a slow tear, letting the tension stretch until even the cameras seemed to zoom in instinctively. The defendant swallowed hard, his fingers curling into fists beneath the table. This, Judy continued, sliding a sheet free, is a certified response from your bank. A tremor passed through his face. My bank? He echoed. Yes, Judy said, almost gently. Your bank. The one you insisted had nothing to do with this case. She held up the document, not for the gallery, not for the cameras, but for him. It shows a transfer, she said. A transfer made to your personal account just days before you demanded early payment from Elena. Elena's breath caught. Marcus leaned forward in disbelief. The father's jaw clenched so tight the muscle twitched beneath the skin. The defendant blinked rapidly. That's unrelated. It was a gift from a family friend. Judy's eyebrow lifted, subtle but devastating. Oh? Then why did it go through the same intermediary you used in your arrangement with Elena? The audience gasped. The defendant's eyes darted to his father, silently begging for rescue. But for once, the father had no script. Judy continued, flipping the page. And here, she said, tapping a specific line, is the part that concerns me most. Her tone shifted, colder, sharper, surgical in its precision. This transfer wasn't just large, it was labeled. She paused. Labeled as expedited compensation. The defendant froze mid-breath. Expedited compensation. The phrase hung like smoke over a fire he'd tried desperately to smother. He stuttered. I didn't write that. The bank must have... Banks don't invent labels, Judy cut in. People do. The father stood abruptly. Your Honor, there must be some mistake. Judy didn't even look at him. Sit down. Her voice hit like a hammer. He sat. The defendant's breathing grew shallow. What does that even mean? He pleaded weakly. That phrase could mean anything. Judy's eyes narrowed, the lighting catching her glasses in a sharp glint. It means, she said, that someone paid you quickly. It means you expected money to come early. And it means your claim that Elena misunderstood the timeline is looking less like confusion, she leaned in, and more like intent. A stunned silence swallowed the room whole. Elena's eyes glistened, not with triumph, but with something like vindication, long overdue. Marcus exhaled slowly, almost shaking his head as the pieces clicked into place. But Judy wasn't done. She set the paper aside and reached below the bench again. This transfer, she said, isn't even the part that troubles me the most. The defendant's head jerked up. His father stiffened. Judy tapped the monitor beside her, dormant until now. Let's take a look, she said, at what the cameras recorded. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as the monitor flickered awake, casting a cold glow across the defendant's face. He stiffened, every muscle tightening like he'd been plugged into an electric current. Judge Judy didn't look at the screen. She watched him. With a single tap, the footage began to play. The hallway of the courthouse appeared, neutral walls, security desk, quiet hum of overhead fluorescence. There he was, the defendant, pacing with the swagger of someone convinced the world was a stage built exclusively for his performance. On screen, he spoke into his phone, voice casual, overconfident. It's fine. I've got this. The judge won't give me trouble. She knows who my dad is. A wave of murmurs rippled through the gallery. The real defendant shrank an inch in his chair. The video continued. Yeah, I told her the new due date. She doesn't have to like it. She needs the deal. She'll fall in line. Elena closed her eyes, her breath trembling. Marcus leaned forward, jaw clenched. Judy paused the footage. Would you like to explain that line? She asked, voice low but piercing. He stammered. I was venting. People vent. It doesn't mean anything. Judy pressed play. The defendant, on camera, laughed into his phone. If she tries to argue, Dad'll smooth things over. Money talks, always has. The gallery erupted into gasps. The father's face drained of color. The defendant shook his head violently. That's taken out of context. You don't even know. But Judy raised a hand, silencing him without effort. Oh, I'm not finished. On screen, a clerk approached the hallway desk. The defendant lowered his phone, stepping closer. Hey, he said, tone dropping into something oily, rehearsed. Saw your schedule's tight. I can make it worth your while if things move quickly today. The clerk pulled back slightly, uncomfortable. The defendant pressed on. Come on, it's nothing big. Just bump me ahead. I'll send a little thank you. The clerk's refusal was clear. Visible discomfort, a shake of the head, before walking away. The defendant cursed under his breath on camera. Judge Judy froze the frame on his face. The courtroom was dead silent. The defendant appeared to shrink under the weight of his own recorded arrogance. It was a joke, he sputtered. I wasn't serious. Judy's voice was almost gentle. Almost. A joke, she echoed. You joke about bribing court staff? The father finally scraped together enough composure to stand. Your Honor, this footage, it doesn't prove intent. Judy cut him off with a look that could have shattered glass. You're correct. It doesn't prove intent. The defendant inhaled sharply, a brief flash of hope. Judy leaned in. It proves opportunity, and opportunity supported by arrogance is more dangerous than intent. The monitor dimmed, but the weight of the footage lingered like a storm cloud. The defendant's breathing quickened. Elena wiped her cheek. Even Marcus looked stunned by the brazenness of what they had just witnessed. Judy clasped her hands, her tone shifting into something sharper, heavier. This footage is bad for you, she said calmly. But what's coming next? She paused, letting the silence coil tight. Is worse, she nodded to the bailiff. Bring me the clerk. We're done pretending this didn't happen. The bailiff approached the bench with careful, deliberate steps. In his hand rested a folded piece of paper, small, unassuming, but suddenly heavier than any document in the room. Judge Judy took it without a word, and the defendant's face drained as if he already knew what it was. Judy unfolded the note slowly, her eyes scanning the handwriting. Precise, nervous, unmistakably genuine. She didn't read it aloud at first. She simply let the silence settle like dust across the courtroom floor. The defendant shifted in his seat, fingers tapping uncontrollably against the table. What is that? He demanded, his voice cracking with an edge he could no longer hide. Judy lifted her gaze. A first-hand account, she said softly. From the clerk you approached. The gallery reacted in a low, rippling wave of gasps. The father's hand shot to his forehead, massaging the bridge of his nose as if pressure alone could undo the damage. Judy turned back to the note. Her voice, when she read, was calm, too calm. The defendant approached me near the security desk. He offered compensation in exchange for being moved up in the docket. When I refused, he insisted his family could fix things. I documented the interaction immediately. She folded the note again, almost reverently, and set it on the bench. Then she looked at him, really looked at him, and something inside him withered under the weight of that stare. You tried to bribe a court clerk, she said. No accusation, no performance, just truth, heavy and undeniable. His response was a frantic tumble of syllables. No, that's not what happened. He misunderstood. I was just talking. Marcus exhaled sharply, a bitter disbelief shaking his head. Elena's hands covered her mouth, eyes glistening with a mix of vindication and stunned sorrow. The father finally stood, desperation tightening his voice. Your Honor, this is hearsay. A note? Without testimony? The side door clicked open. Every head turned. The clerk stepped inside, shoulders tense but chin raised, eyes steady despite the storm awaiting him. He wore the humility of a man who never expected to stand center stage, and the courage of someone who refused to let corruption walk by unchallenged. The defendant whispered, "Oh, God." Judy didn't spare him a glance. "Mr. Hale," she said to the clerk, "please approach." The clerk swallowed, stepping forward with small but determined strides. As he reached the witness spot, the courtroom felt suspended, like the entire room was holding its breath, waiting to see whether this ordinary man would break or stand firm. Judy looked at him with quiet encouragement. "Is everything in this note accurate?" she asked. The clerk's voice trembled, but not with fear. "Yes, Your Honor," he said. "Every word." The defendant's chair scraped backward sharply as he jolted up. "You're lying," he shouted. "You're making this up because she's trying to—" Judy slammed her gavel once. "Sit down." He sat. Judy adjusted her glasses, eyes narrowing. "I'll need more than a note," she said. "I want to hear your full account, under oath." The courtroom door eased shut behind him with a soft click, but the sound landed like a gavel strike. The clerk stood there, nervous, pale, but undeniably resolute. For the first time, the defendant looked not panicked, but cornered. He approached the witness stand with cautious steps, each one echoing against the polished floor. His hands shook slightly as he adjusted his tie, but when he finally raised his eyes to Judge Judy, something steadied inside him. "Sir," Judy said gently, "you will be sworn in." The bailiff administered the oath, and the clerk's voice, though quivering, carried enough conviction to slice straight through the tension. Once seated, Judy leaned forward. "Take a breath," she instructed, "and tell me what happened, in your own words." The clerk swallowed hard, glancing briefly at the defendant, who stared back at him with a venomous mixture of disbelief and simmering rage. "He approached me in the hallway," the clerk began. "At first it seemed like small talk, but then he made an offer." His voice faltered. Judy nodded. "Go on." "He said he could show appreciation if I helped move his case up on the docket," the clerk said, hands tightening around the edges of the stand. "I told him that wasn't allowed. He insisted. He kept lowering his voice, offering more." The defendant shot out of his seat. "Liar!" Judy didn't even look at him. "Sit down." He sat, seething. The clerk continued, gathering courage piece by piece. "He said his family had influence, that things go faster when the right people are involved. I refused again. I walked away, but he followed me for a few steps and said I'd regret passing on easy money." A hush fell over the courtroom, thick, disbelieving, electric. The father rubbed his forehead as if battling a migraine that came with a side of public humiliation. Judy's expression didn't change, but something colder settled in her eyes. "Do you have any reason?" she asked. "Any personal motive at all to lie about this?" The clerk shook his head firmly. "No, Your Honor, I didn't want to be involved at all. But when I saw the way the plaintiff was treated, I felt like I couldn't stay silent." Elena's eyes filled, not with pity, but gratitude. Marcus folded his arms, nodding slowly, as if finally someone else in this world understood what he'd endured. The defendant, cornered and spiraling, erupted. "This is ridiculous. They're all teaming up. This is a setup." Judy turned her full attention to him, her voice dangerously calm. "Sir, the only person who set anything up is you." He fell back into his chair, stunned into silence. Judy returned to the clerk. "One more question," she said. "When he offered you money, did he imply this was standard practice?" The clerk hesitated, but only for a moment. "He said he'd done it before," he whispered, "and that it always works." The father's face cracked. The defendant looked like the floor had dropped out beneath him. Judy closed her file slowly. "I think," she said, voice tinged with something darker than disappointment, "it's time we talk about who taught you this." The clerk's final words were still hanging in the air. He said he'd done it before. The defendant blinked rapidly, like a man waking up to find the walls moving inward. Judge Judy leaned back slightly, not relaxed, merely giving him enough rope to tangle himself. She clasped her hands. "Mr. Connors," she said, voice low, "the clerk testified that you implied someone taught you this behavior." The defendant's lips twitched. He looked at his father, then away, then back again, as if searching those familiar polished features for guidance. But the father wasn't offering any. He sat, stone still, eyes forward, jaw clenched tightly enough to crack enamel. Judy continued, "So let me ask you plainly, who taught you this? Who showed you that bending the rules, no, breaking them was acceptable? A thick silence pressed down upon the room. The defendant swallowed, hard. I didn't mean, he began, words stumbling over each other. It's not like that. I said something stupid, okay? I didn't mean. Judy cut him off, voice soft as a whispered blade. That wasn't my question. He wilted. His eyes darted around the courtroom, as if hoping the walls might rise and shield him from this moment. His father's expression had shifted, not outrage, but warning. A subtle, lethal, lawyer-trained signal. Choose your next sentence carefully. But panic had a grip on him now, a deep, desperate grip, and panic does not take advice. It was my dad, he blurted, voice cracking through the still air. The audience collectively gasped. The father jerked as if struck. Judy didn't flinch. She simply blinked once, slowly, absorbing the confession not with surprise but with confirmation. Your father taught you to bribe court staff? She asked. No, the defendant cried, face flushing a mottled red. Not like that. He just said that sometimes things go faster if you know the right people. If you grease wheels. That's what he told me. The father shot up to his feet. That is a gross mischaracterization. Sit, Judy ordered. He sat. The clerk stared in stunned disbelief. Marcus nodded grimly. Like puzzle pieces he'd suspected for years were finally clicking into place. Elena wrapped her arms around herself, shaken but deeply validated. Judy folded her hands atop her bench. So, let me be sure I understand, she said softly, the calm before a moral hurricane. You attempted to influence court staff because you believed your father had done it before. The defendant wiped sweat from his brow. I didn't say he did, just that he told me. Yes, Judy interrupted, you did. He froze. The father's eyes were wide now, not with arrogance but with dread. True, bone-deep dread. Judy leaned forward. Do you know why this concerns me, Mr. Connors? He shook his head weakly. Because this isn't the first time, Judy said quietly, that your father's conduct has come across my bench. The courtroom went dead still. The father blanched. The defendant's mouth fell open. Judy continued, voice steady and razor-sharp. Years ago, an ethics complaint was filed involving your father. It was dismissed for lack of evidence. But if you're saying, directly or indirectly, that he taught you these behaviors, she let the weight of her words land. Then this case is no longer just about you. Judy closed her file, eyes locked on the two men whose faces mirrored collapsing worlds. And I think, she said softly, it's time I reopened something that should have never been closed. Judge Judy slid a thin, time-worn folder across the bench. Its edges were frayed, its label faded, but its presence sent a visible tremor through the father's composure. For the first time, the man who believed he was untouchable looked exposed. Judy didn't open the folder immediately. She let it sit there, a quiet ghost from a past everyone else had tried to forget. This, she said, tapping the cover, was an ethics complaint filed against you almost a decade ago. The father swallowed, hard enough for the gallery to hear. It was dismissed, he managed to gasp, baseless, anonymous, no credibility. Judy raised a single eyebrow. Yes, dismissed because evidence was inconclusive, not non-existent. A wave of murmurs washed through the courtroom. The defendant turned toward his father with shock, betrayal, and disbelief swirling in his expression. You told me, he whispered, but the father cut him off sharply. Not now. Judy opened the file with deliberate slowness, the pages crackling softly, a sound that felt like time being rewound. There were allegations, she read, that you pressured a junior clerk into altering the filing schedule for one of your cases. The clerk later resigned. No charges, no proof. She glanced up. But today, something interesting happened. The father's hands curled into fists. Judy continued. Your son described behavior, bribery attempts, expectation of preferential treatment that mirrors the allegations in this file. The father's mask shattered. His shoulders sagged, and he exhaled like a man whose secrets had begun slipping from his grasp. Across the aisle, Elena watched the scene unfold, realizing that her suffering wasn't an isolated event. It was part of a lineage of entitlement, Marcus leaned forward, arms crossed, taking in every second like a man finally seeing the architecture of a system that had once crushed him. Judy closed the folder. "This is not a court of criminal law," she said, "but it is a court of credibility. And your credibility," she pointed at the defendant, "has been crumbling since you opened your mouth." Then she pointed at the father. "And yours just collapsed entirely." The defendant blinked rapidly, panic rising in his throat. "You lied to me," he whispered to his father. "You told me that complaint was fake. You told me," the father snapped, "I told you what you needed to hear." Then instantly regretted it, because every camera was on him. Judy softened her tone, not gentle, but disappointed. 1,000 cases had brought her this expression, reserved only for those who built their lives on corruption instead of mistakes. "I don't enjoy reopening old wounds," she said. "But when patterns repeat across generations, the past matters." The father lowered his gaze. The son stared at the table, devastated in a way that exceeded legal consequences. This was the collapse of a myth he'd been raised on. Judy exhaled slowly, letting compassion and firmness blend in her voice. "The truth," she said, "has been whispering for years. Today, it finally spoke." She tapped the folder once more. "And now that the echoes are out in the open, we deal with the consequences." The father sat motionless, staring at the folder as though it were radioactive. The son, once smug, once untouchable, looked like a shattered reflection of himself, and Judge Judy watched them with the steady gaze of someone who had seen empires of arrogance crumble before. Judy folded her hands atop the bench, the quiet gestures somehow louder than any gavel strike. "Stand," she ordered. The defendant struggled to his feet. His father rose beside him, slower, like the weight of years and secrets had suddenly doubled. Judy studied them, father and son, two monuments of entitlement now reduced to trembling silhouettes beneath the lights. "This," she said, gesturing between them, "is what happens when arrogance is passed down like an inheritance." The gallery fell silent, leaning into every word. The father attempted one last shard of resistance. "Your Honor, if I may clarify—" "You've clarified enough," Judy interrupted sharply. "You've clarified for years, in chambers, in hallways, in the shadows of this system." The father's jaw tightened. Judy shifted her attention to the son, whose hands now trembled visibly. "You built a worldview," she said, "where rules were suggestions and consequences were for other people. You believed your father's influence would shield you, just as he believed his reputation shielded him." The son's voice cracked. "I didn't know. I thought he—" "Yes," Judy said softly. "You thought he was untouchable." She rose slightly in her chair, not towering over them, but commanding the room in a way that made the truth impossible to hide from. "Let me tell you something about people who think they're untouchable," she continued. "They're usually the first to fall, because they never learned how to stand on their own integrity." The son looked at his father as if seeing him for the first time, not as a mentor, but as the architect of his ruin. Elena watched them, a hand pressed over her heart. Not satisfaction, just a quiet, aching understanding of how far the privileged will go when accountability finally knocks. Marcus exhaled, a long, heavy breath that seemed to release years of injustice. Judy paced the smallest arc behind her bench, her voice low, the temperature of controlled fury. "You lied, you manipulated, you tried to influence court staff, you exploited people who trusted you. And you did it because you believed your father had done worse and walked away clean." The father flinched as if struck. "And here's the truth," Judy continued. "You didn't just fail ethically, you failed morally, you failed as an attorney, and you," she pointed to the son, "failed as a human being long before you failed as a defendant." The son looked down at the table, eyes wet, breath uneven. His father stood rigid, but the cracks were deep now, cuts running through a lifetime of constructed invincibility. Judy sat again, the courtroom holding its breath. "I'm making a formal recommendation," she announced, voice ironclad, "and trust me," she let the words sharpen, "it's not the one you're expecting." The father straightened, alarm jolting through him. The son swallowed hard, bracing for impact. Judy picked up her pen, poised above the ruling form. "What happens next," she said, "will change both of your lives." Judge Judy lifted her ruling form, and the courtroom went silent in a way that felt almost sacred. The father and son stood rigid, matching expressions of dread carved into two different generations of the same arrogance, and for the first time, neither of them had anything left to say. Judy exhaled, a long, steady breath that carried the weight of everything the courtroom had witnessed. When she finally spoke, her voice was clear, unwavering, and sharp enough to leave marks. "First," she said, turning her attention to Elena, "your claim is upheld in full." Elena's hand flew to her mouth. Relief flooded her face. But it was not the victorious kind. It was the soft, exhausted kind that comes from surviving a storm that lasted far too long. Judy continued, "In fact, I am awarding the maximum civil penalties permitted in this jurisdiction." The son blinked, slowly, painfully, like each word was another strike erasing the belief system he'd been raised on. The father attempted to regain composure, but his voice cracked when he spoke. "Your Honor, the penalties seem—" Judy raised her hand. "No, we're past negotiation. We're past excuses. Today is about accountability." Marcus nodded from his seat, arms crossed, not vindictive, but finally validated. Judy then turned her gaze on the defendant, her tone shifting, becoming colder. "You attempted to manipulate vulnerable people. You attempted to influence court procedure. You forged documents. You lied on the stand. You violated every principle of fair dealing this courtroom stands for." The son trembled, visibly unraveling. "But," Judy said, "those are not the gravest concerns." She shifted her focus to the father, who stood stiff, breath shallow, eyes fixed on the bench as though bracing for an impact he'd always believed he was immune to. "You," she said, voice lower now, "used your reputation to shield misconduct. You taught your son that justice is something you buy, not something you respect. That arrogance is a virtue, that rules are obstacles, and that consequences are optional." The father's throat bobbed, his polished exterior faded like cheap paint in the rain. "Therefore," Judy continued, "I am formally recommending to the State Bar that both of you, father and son, be reviewed for ethical violations." The gallery erupted in gasps. The father's knees buckled slightly. He grabbed the edge of the table to steady himself. The son stared at the floor as if wishing it would open beneath him. "And," Judy added, "I will be forwarding this case to producers for internal review. Every step you took inside this courtroom will be examined." Elena wiped a tear. Marcus nodded in quiet satisfaction. The clerk exhaled shakily, finally released from the dread of silence. Judy leaned forward. "Justice," she said, "cannot be bought. Not today, not ever." Then she turned her gaze back to the defendant. No anger, no fire, just pure, piercing truth. "But before we close," she said, "there is one more thing we need to address." The gallery froze. Even the air felt suspended. Judy clasped her hands. "What comes next," she said softly, "is not about punishment. It's about understanding who you were and who you might still become. Do you think the father deserves the same consequences as the son?" Judge Judy folded her hands, the courtroom hushed and waiting. The father and son stood before her, two shadows of the power they once believed they possessed. This was the moment of truth, not verdict. Judy's voice emerged softer than before, carrying not the sharp sting of judgment, but the solemn weight of a lesson long overdue. "Mr. Connors," she said, eyes settling on the son, "justice isn't about winning. It isn't about influence. It isn't about the size of your bank account. Justice is about truth. Plain and simple. And today, the truth caught up with you." He swallowed, eyes red, shoulders quivering. His arrogance had evaporated long ago. All that remained was a young man seeing, with late, painful clarity, the damage his entitlement had caused. She continued, "You hurt people. You manipulated them. You used their vulnerability as leverage. But more importantly, far more importantly, you learned those behaviors from someone you believed you could trust." The father flinched visibly. Judy shifted her gaze to him next, not triumphantly but mournfully. "And you," she said, "you failed him long before he ever failed this court." He looked down, finally, fully, stripped of pretense. You taught him, Judy said, that justice is negotiable, that influence replaces integrity, that consequences can be dodged. And when you raise someone on those principles, this is the result. Her gaze returned to the sun. You've been living inside a shadow you didn't build, but now that shadow has cracked, and for the first time in your life, you have a choice. Continue the legacy you inherited, or reject it. The young man's breath trembled as he wiped a tear he didn't bother to hide. Judy closed the case file, not with finality, but with a sense of release. This ruling stands, she said firmly. The plaintiff is compensated in full, the penalties are applied, and my recommendations to the state bar will be submitted immediately. Elena exhaled, shoulders collapsing with relief. Tears shimmered in her eyes, not over the money, but over finally being believed. Marcus nodded quietly, his expression softening for the first time that day. The clerk bowed his head, tension melting from his frame. Judy looked at each of them with the steady empathy she kept hidden beneath her sharp exterior. You stood up, she told them, and standing up, especially against power, is never easy. But justice requires courage, and today all of you showed it. Then she turned once more to the father and son. The world may have taught you that power is loud, she said, but real power, the kind that lasts, is quiet. It's earned. It's honest. A pause. And it never needs to be purchased. The defendant's breath hitched. His father's eyes glistened with a grief that had nothing to do with pride and everything to do with recognition. Judy lifted her gavel. This courtroom is adjourned. As the gavel struck, she murmured, almost to herself, arrogance collapses, truth doesn't. And the echo that followed wasn't judgment, it was justice.